Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video, what we're going to do is learn about how we can implement drag and drop functionality within our React application. And in order to learn this, we're going to be building the project that you see here on screen. So this is a very simple shopping list that is going to list all of the items that we need to get from a particular store. So for example, from Walmart, I need to get 3% milk and I also need to get butter. From Indigo, which is a bookstore, I need to get this Designing Data Intensive Applications book, as well as Atomic Habits. And then from Lowe's, which is a home hardware store, I want to get a workbench as well as a hammer. Now, I want the flexibility to kind of move things around. So for example, maybe I want to go to Indigo first and then Walmart and then Lowe's. And I want to have that flexibility to kind of change the order. Well, we do with this application, because right now you can see here that I can drag Indigo up and then Walmart is going down. And of course, if I want Lowe's to be up, I can do that. I can drag and drop anywhere I want. All right, so we have that flexibility, but I want even more flexibility. As you can see here, the items that belong to each particular store, I might want to move them to another store. So for example, maybe I don't want a very sophisticated hammer. I just want a very simple one that I can get cheaply from Walmart. So maybe I want to move this to this Walmart section. Well, I can. And so I can go over here, I can just move it wherever it is that I want. I can of course reorder this over here as well, and I can recategorize it to different stores. So this is what we are going to be building. And once you learn how to build an application like this, I promise you and assure you, you're going to be able to understand exactly how to build whatever drag and drop functionality that you want for your special use case. Now, of course, we're not going to be building this from scratch. That would be overkill because there's a wonderful library out there called react-beautiful-dnd that is going to do a lot of the work for us. And this is an incredible library that was created by a company called Atlassian. Atlassian is a huge company, and the most notable thing that they have created is Jira, which is a project management dashboard, and it involves a lot of dragging and dropping. So I really trust this library over any other library because it's created by a company which its core platform, core software, has drag and drop features thoroughly. So this is what we're going to be using. We're going to be learn all about react-beautiful-dnd. Now, before we do that, let's just take a quick look at some of the different examples that they have given us. So if you go over here, you can kind of scroll through the documentation, and you can see all of the different things that you can accomplish with this library. I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in here. So you have the basic lists, and as you can see, we have this really nice animation that we get. So we have that. We can have large data sets as well. We can have scrollable and then also drag and drop. We can have tables, as you can see here. Let's see what else we can have. We can have this. This is very similar to what Jira is, the project management tool. So we can move things and drag and drop them into different columns. Let's go over here with the medium data set. You can just kind of see how we can reorder things and recategorize things. Really cool stuff. Let's just look at a few more here. You know, we can as soon as we're dragging something, we can also change the overall look of it, the styles, etc. So now you can see here, I mean, there's just a bunch of funky stuff that we can do. All right, so now that you understand what we are going to be building, let's go ahead and build it. And I hope you guys are very excited because I think this is going to be a very powerful tool in your tool set. All right, so I'll see you guys in the next video. The first thing that we need to do, of course, is to create a React application. So let's go ahead and do that together. I'm going to go open up my terminal because I am on a Mac. You can open up your command prompt, and we're going to execute the command npx create react app. So I'm going to go into my desktop and I'm going to say npx create, and I'll say react app, and then I'm going to give my app a name. Let's just call it drag and drop tut for tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. And while it's creating, I'm going to open it up inside of VS Code. So I'm going to go to VS Code. I'm going to go to File. Let's open a new folder. And let's just wait the year. And once that is over, so we're going to go over here. And we're going to open that up inside of VS Code. Once I can find it, let's see. It's in my desktop. First thing right there. Okay, so now we have a typical React application. And as you can see, there's really nothing in there. And that's because it's still developing, which is all fine and dandy. Now, once it's done, we should obviously have a React application. And I expect you to know exactly how a React application works if you're taking this tutorial. Now, while this is downloading, what we're going to do is we're going to go to my GitHub repository. Because what I want to do is I want to copy some of the styles that I have already configured, just so we don't spend a lot of time doing unnecessary things that take us away from the drag and drop functionality. So we're going to go to my repositories, and I'll have this link in the description below. We're going to go to react-beautiful-dnd tutorial. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the source, and we're going to go to the app.css, and we're just going to copy all of these different styles. Now let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go and just copy all of these styles. Let's go back to our application. You can see now our application has a bunch of directories. I'm going to zoom in and maybe zoom out to one. Let's just zoom out one more. And let's go over to our app.css. And I'm just going to remove everything. And I'm just going to paste in what I have inside of my repository. Now, there's one more thing that I would like to also paste, and then that's pretty much everything. We're going to go to the app.js, and as you can see here, we have the data that I was talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab this data of the store as well as the items. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our app.js, and just right over here, we're just going to paste that in there. And that's it. That's all it is that we need to do. So let's open up our integrated terminal, and once we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an npm, and then we already installed everything. We're going to do an npm run start just to start up our app, just to see how it looks. Also, what we're going to do, I'm going to say yes for this because I'm running on port 3000 as well as port 3001. So let's go over here, and what we're going to do is we are going to clean some stuff up. So I'm going to remove a lot of this boilerplate. So let's just go here and let's just remove everything inside of this div so we have a blank slate. So I'm going to save that, and now once I go to our application, you can see here that we have this completely blank slate with this black screen. So this is looking pretty good to me, and of course the black screen is coming from right over here, which is going to be our body. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and start building the HTML structure of our new shopping list in the next section. In this video, what we're going to do is build out the HTML or JSX for our shopping list. And then in the next video, we're going to start implementing that drag and drop functionality. So let's go over here to our application, and we're just going to build things out. So I'm going to go right over here to where we have this empty div, and instead of having a class name of app, I'm going to call this layout _ wrapper. And then within this, I'm going to create another div, and I'm going to give this the class of card, because that's just going to be our card that we are going to display. And as you can see, this is what we get. Of course, the styles are coming from here, which I have already configured. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Let's add another div for our header. So I'm going to say div. We're going to give this a class of header. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say h1 right over here. And I'm going to call this shopping list, so we know exactly what this is. So now if we look at it, you can see we have this nice, neat little shopping list. Okay, so this is looking pretty good to me. But now what I would like to do is I would like to iterate over this, this data. And what I would like to do afterwards is, of course, render each particular card. Now, this data right now is going to change consistently, and whenever it changes, I do also want it to change inside of the JSX. So we need to define it as a piece of state. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say stores and also say set stores. I'm going to say that that is going to be equal to use state. And notice that I auto imported it. I'm just going to give it the initial value of data. Now, of course, in a real application, we're not going to have some hard-coded data. This would come from some sort of API. But nonetheless, once the data comes in, it's going to be stored inside of our state. So this is, at the end of the day, kind of mocking the exact same thing. So now that we have that out of the way, what we are going to do is we're going to do that nice little iteration. So let's do that. We'll do it right over here. Let's create a div. And within this div, I'm going to say stores.map. I'm going to map through each store. And then for each store, what we're going to do is we're going to render a div. So we're going to render a div that is going to contain all of the information for that particular store. So let's go over here. And we're going to have a div. So let's have this div right here. And then let's close it off, of course. And then within this, let's also have another div that's going to house the store container. So I'm going to say here, class of store container. And then here, what we're going to have is we're going to have the store name. So we're going to say whatever the store dot name is. So now if I were to go ahead and save this, you can see here we have Walmart, Indigo, as well as Lowe's. Now, of course, the final version also had the items that we needed within these stores, but let's not add that right away. What I would like to do right now is I want to make this functionality work. I want this to be drag and droppable. So I want to be able to reorder Walmart, Indigo, and Lowe's, and then later on we'll add the items and have the ability to drag and drop those. So let's address how we are going to accomplish this in the next video. Like promised, in this video, what we're going to do is start working on the drag and drop functionality of our shopping list so we can start reordering the different stores. But before we do that, we need to really understand some fundamental concepts inside of react-beautiful-dnd, which is going to be the library that we have chosen to implement this drag and drop functionality. So there are three main components that come with react-beautiful-dnd that we really need to understand. And that is the DragDropContext, the Droppable component, as well as the Draggable component. So for now, let's just completely omit the DragDropContext and let's just look at these two components right over here and let's try to understand exactly what they do. Let's say that we have an application that looks something like this. So we have this container right over here, and this container contains a bunch of these different items. And we also have this container right over here. And what we want is the ability to move this item over here if we want to. So we want to be able to move these different items to this container. And then if there are any items over here, so let's say I move item 3 all the way to this container, I also want the ability to move it back and forth. Now, here's the thing though. I only want the ability to move these items, so item 1, 2, and 3, between these two containers, these two UI elements within my application. I don't want the ability to move this item to literally any place in my app. I don't want the ability to move this to the nav bar. I don't want the ability to move this item into the footer. So we need to specify that these are the only places where I can move and drop items. I also need to specify all of the items that are draggable. I don't want to have the ability to, again, go to my nav bar and just drag it and drop it anywhere that I want. I have to specify the droppable areas as well as the draggable areas. And that's exactly what the droppable as well as the draggable components are. They are used to specify where we can drag and drop draggable elements. So over here, we can just grab this draggable element and we can drop it into this droppable component as well as this droppable component. However, if there's another component that is not droppable, then I can't get this draggable item and just drop it in there. That is not something that I can do. So I hope that makes sense. But now, what is the drag drop context? Well, whenever we have any sort of drag and drop event, we need to eventually change our state. Because as you can see here, if I were to go to my application, you can see that right now my state is in a state where Walmart is the first thing, and then Indigo is the second thing, and then Lowe's is the third thing. And what I want to do is if I were to drag and drop and reorder these different things, what I want to do is I want to change my state so that, for example, now Walmart is the first index and Indigo is the 0th index, just to change the order. Because of course, if my state remains the same, nothing is going to happen. So that is what the drag drop context does. It listens for any particular event that occurs, and then it allows us to update our state accordingly. So that is what we need to do. Now let's go ahead and implement it. So the first thing, of course, we're going to have to do is install the react-beautiful-dnd library. So I'm going to just say npm install. We're going to say react-beautiful. We're going to say dnd, which is drag and drop. Now, once that installs, what we're going to do is we're going to grab all of the necessary components that we have just talked about. So let's just go all the way over here. And I'm going to import from react-beautiful-dnd. We're going to grab the drag drop context. So the drag drop context, we're going to grab the droppable. So the droppable, and then also we want the draggable, like so. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap our whole application with the drag drop context, because we want to listen for any drag and drop events within this app component. So let's go over here and we're just going to go ahead and do that. So let's go, maybe not our whole application, we'll just wrap it within the card. We don't have to do it for the whole app. So we're going to say here, we're going to create this component and we're going to close it off. And I am going to cut, I'm going to try to find where this lives right over here. So we're going to have the drag drop context. Now this is going to take in a prop that is going to be called on drag end. And this is a very necessary prop that we need to have. And this is going to be equal to a function. And whenever, again, some sort of drag event happens, what's going to happen is we're going to call this function that we have specified. For now, let's just console.log. And I'm going to console.log drag drop event occurred, just so we know that that happened. But of course, later on, we're going to do some more sophisticated stuff. Okay, so now what do we need to deal with? Well, we need to deal with our droppable. Where do we want to drop our draggable elements? Well, here's the thing. At this point in our application, we only have one droppable, which is this area right over here. We want to be able to drag these blue elements within this one droppable. So we're going to specify just one droppable. I'm going to specify it, let's specify it right over here, right under the header. So I'm going to, instead of this div, I'm just going to say droppable. So I'm going to say droppable. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that. I'm going to say droppable. Now the droppable is going to take in some props. So the props that it absolutely need is the droppable ID. As you can see here, if we go back to our example, we can have multiple different droppables. And we need to somehow uniquely identify which droppable we are dragging an item into. So that's why we need to specify the droppable ID. Now, because we only have one droppable for this particular portion of our application, we can just kind of hard code a string value. And typically what's done is you just give it the droppable ID of root. Now we can also specify the type, and I'm going to give this the type of group, because what it's doing is just grouping all of the things together. All right, so now we have specified our droppable, and within it, it seems as though we have our children, and we're going to go ahead and render them. So I'm going to go and save this. And this is going to cause an error because children is not acceptable. What is acceptable within a droppable component is a function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out. And then over here, I'm going to specify a arrow function that is going to return a div. So I'm going to say an arrow function that is going to return a div. And this arrow function contains a parameter typically called provided. And this is going to give us quite a bit of information about our current state of our app. So within this div, what we can do is we can kind of paste back in what we had. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste back the store. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now we have this same exact state that we are in. But now we have this provided parameter that we can utilize. So with this provided parameter, what we're going to need to do is we need to grab this parent div and we need to give it some props. We need to give it props to make this particular div right over here a droppable component. So we're going to go over here and we're going to say ... provided, and then I'm going to say droppable props. So we're destructuring the droppable props and we're giving it to this div. And then also what we're going to do is we're going to specify a ref, and this is going to be equal to provided dot inner ref. So let's go ahead and save that. So now, as you can see, I mean, it looks exactly the same. Nothing seems like it's working. Well, that's because now what we need to do is we need to specify the draggable. So now instead of a div, let's go ahead and have a draggable component. So I'm going to go right about here. I'm going to say draggable. And as well over here, we're going to say draggable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out because the draggable works in the exact same way as the provided. We need to have, or the droppable, we need to have a function. Now, before we do that, we have to specify some things. We have to specify the draggable ID. Now, because we have multiple different draggable elements, this, of course, has to be unique. We can't just hard code something. Now, luckily, what we can do is we can just utilize the store.id. As you can see, this is a UUID that is consistently unique. So let's go over here, and I'm going to say store.id. We're going to go ahead and provide that. Now, because we're iterating over something, we need to provide the key. So we're going to say store.id as well. And we also have to provide the current index that this draggable is in. So what we can do here is we can grab the index, and we can say over here, index is equal to index. And then right over here, we can have the same sort of state. We can say provided. And let's go over here. And this can render a div. Or this can just render, yeah, it will render a div. And then within this div, I'll just paste what we had here. So we had another div. And actually, we can just kind of remove this uppermost div. We don't really need that. So if I were to save this, as you can see here, again, everything seems all fine and dandy. Nothing seems to be different than what we had before, except now our code is significantly more complicated. So why do we do this? Well, now what we can do is we can grab this provided that we have here, and we can give this div all of the draggable props. And once we do that, it's going to behave in a very unique way, in that it's going to allow us to drag and drop some things. So I'm going to go over here. We're going to destructure a few things. So I'm going to destructure out the provided dot. I'm going to say drag handle props. So we need to destructure that. We also need to destructure out the provided dot. And I'm going to say draggable props. And then lastly, we need to give it a ref. I'm going to say this ref is going to be provided, and we'll say dot inner ref. So once I save that, some magic is going to happen. So I'm going to just refresh my application, and right away you can see that this is not working, and I was not expecting that. Let's just see how this is. So we have the provided dot drag handle props. We have the provided dot drag handle this. we have the ref, me in the future here. So the reason why this isn't working is because react-beautiful-dnd does not really work when you are on strict mode. And it took me quite a bit to figure this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to index.js and we're just going to completely remove this portion. Now this right over here is just really used for development purposes. So we can just remove it and it's not going to affect our production environment. So now once we do that, as you can see here right away, it seems as though it is working. We have this drag effect. And there we go. So you can see, ta-da, it is indeed working. However, of course, what's happening is I'm able to drag and drop, and we're getting this really cool animation. But once I put Walmart all the way to the bottom, you can see that it gets redirected all the way back to the top. And the reason for this, as I stated, is because we are not changing the state of our application. And we need to do that in order to persist this new state within our app. So let's go ahead and handle that in the next video. In this video, what we are going to do is learn about how we can handle drag drop events. Because right now we have this drag drop event that is happening, but we're not handling it correctly because we're not updating our state, which is causing everything to go back to what it was before. So let's go ahead and do that. And now, like I said, the handling of drag drop events is going to occur within this callback, this on drag and callback. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function. I'm going to say handle, and I'm going to call it handle drag drop. And this is going to be a arrow function. And what we are going to do just for now is we're going to go ahead and we are going to render that instead of the arrow function that we had before. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console.log for now. I'm going to say hello there. So I'm going to go back to my application. I am going to right click and inspect. And anytime I do any sort of drag drop event, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to expect that to log. As you can see here, we have this hello there. So I'm dragging, I dropped, and then we get this hello there. Drag in, drop in, I get that hello there. So anytime this event occurs, we are calling that function. Now this function has a parameter, and this parameter, typically we just call it the results. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to say results. And let's go and console.log these results because we need to understand this in order to update our state accordingly. So I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to update it. And you can see here that we have this pretty large object. Now within this object, there's a bunch of things that we should probably know about. But the most important thing that I want to tell you, and I want you to pay close attention to, is the destination as well as the source. Now we're going to look at some other things later, but the destination and the source are the most vital things that you need to understand. And because they're so important to understand, I have a diagram. So let's go over here back to our example where we have 2 droppables and we have 3 draggables. And we're going to say that this droppable has a droppable ID of 1. Now this is of course going to be a string because droppable IDs cannot be numbers. So we're just going to say the string of 1. And then this has a droppable ID of 2. So let's say what I want to do is I want to eventually grab item 2 and I want to drag it and drop it over here into this droppable 2. So from droppable 1 to droppable 2. How is the source and destination going to look like? Well, in this case, once I grab it and I drag it over here, the source is going to look something like this. So droppable ID 1 index 1, and then over here destination, that's going to have droppable ID of 2 index 1. So what is going on here? Well, the source is the original state where the draggable was in. So as you can see here, we have a droppable ID of 1 and an index of 1. Well, the originally item 2, this draggable, was in the droppable that has an ID of 1, and it had an index of 1. As you can see here, this has an index of 0. This has an index of 1. Now let's go back over here. Once we moved it, well, the destination was droppable of ID 2 and then the index of 1. So we moved it from the source, so which it was originally, to this destination. And then this has a droppable ID of 2 as well as an index of 1, because again, it's the second element within our array. So this is really all it is that we need to understand when it comes to source and destination. Source is where it was coming from. The destination is where it eventually landed at. So let's look at another example just to really hone this in. So we have the item, we have the same exact state. And now let's say what I want to do is I want to move item 2 not over here, but above item 3. So within the same droppable 2, but I want to move it above it, just like that. So now we have item 2 over here, and then item 3 like this. So how is this going to look? Well, the source is, of course, going to stay the same because it stayed in the exact same state. So droppable of 1, index of 1. But this time we have a droppable ID of 2, an index of 0, of course, because now it is the first element in the array. Let's look at one more example. Let's say now what I want to do is I want to just reorder item 2 so that it is on top and item 1 is at the bottom. So just like this. How is that going to look? Well, it's going to look something like this. We have a droppable ID of 1, an index of 1. The droppable ID is exactly the same now because we didn't change the droppable component, but we have changed the index. So this is what we need to understand. And with this information, we can very, very simply just update what it is that we need to update. So let's go over here. As you can see here, the destination, the droppable ID is the root because we only have one droppable ID. Similarly over here, the root. So it's the exact same droppable ID. However, as you can see, the indices are changing. So let me go ahead and I'm just going to refresh this. So this right here, I'm going to move Walmart to the very bottom. And let's just see what we get. So if we were to move to the very bottom, you can see here the source was, well, the droppable ID is the root. The index is 0. So that's what it was before. And then the destination is, well, droppable ID of root and then the index of 2. So with this information, what we can do is we can change our state accordingly. So let's go ahead and accomplish that. So I'm going to go over here and we are going to destructure out the source as well as the destination. So we're going to say source, destination. And as you can see, we also had some other things too. So for example, we had the type, which was a group. So we can also grab that if we wanted to. So we can go over here, we can say type, and we can say, I want to grab that from the results. All right. So now the first thing that we need to do is that the destination could be null. So what we're going to do is we're going to check if the destination is null. So if it's not defined, we're just going to return early and do nothing. The next thing that we want to do is if the destination and the source have the exact same droppable ID as well as the exact same index, we also want to do nothing. So for example, if I went ahead and I just dragged this and then I moved it back to the original state, as you can see here, this is going to be the destination is going to have an index of 0, droppable ID of 0, and then a droppable ID of root, and then an index of 0. So if it's the exact same state, I don't want to do any computation. I just want to return early. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say source.droppableID. If that is equal to the destination.droppableID, so we're going to say destination.droppableID, and we also have to check the index because within the same droppable ID, we could always just change the order of things. So let's just say and the source.index is equal to the destination.index. We also want to return early. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly save that. Now, if we pass these two states, then we want to reorder our state right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if type is equal to group. So as you can see here, we have given this a type of group. So we can check that. So we can say if type is equal to group. And the reason why we're doing this, we'll see later, is once we have multiple droppables, we want to kind of figure out exactly how to reassign things. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to reorder our state over here, our store state. So let's create a new variable. So I'm going to say const reordered. I'll say reordered stores. And I'm going to say that that is going to be equal to the original stores. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do some sort of splitting things up here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to grab the source index. Let me go ahead and just assign this as a value. So remember, source index is where it was before. So I kind of want to remove it from that piece of state. So for example, let me go ahead and just show you what I mean here. So let's just say Walmart, Lowe's, or Indigo, as well as let's say Lowe's. So let's say that the source index, so source index is equal to the source.index. And let's presume that the source index is 0 for our case. Well, what I want to do is I want to completely remove that item from our array. So this is how our array looks like right now. I just want to remove that item that has the source index of 0. So in this case, it's this one over here. So that's what I would like to do. Now, how would I do that? Well, what I can do is I can say const, and then I can say removed store, and I can say that that is going to be equal to reordered stores dot splice. And what I want to do is I want to splice the element that is at source index, and I only want to splice that one element. So what that's going to do is it's going to completely remove Walmart from this array, and it's going to assign it to this variable right over here. So that's going to remove it from our state, which is good, which is what we want to do. But now what we want to do is we want to add it back to our array. But this time, what we would like to do is we want to add it back at the destination index. So I'm going to say const, and I'll say destination index, and that's going to be equal to the destination.index. And in order to do that, what we can do here is we can say reordered store, and I'm going to say dot splice, and I want to splice at the destination index, but this time I don't want to remove anything, so I'm going to say I want to remove nothing, and I just want to add this removed store. And so let's say that the destination index in our case is 2. What it's going to do is it's going to go to 0, 1, and then over here it's going to add Walmart. And that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. So now what we can do is we can just return set store to be equal to, and then we can say that that's going to be equal to the reordered stores. All right, so I hope that makes sense. I hope that was nice and clear. So now what we can do here is let's just do a quick little refresh. And if I update this, ta-da, you can see it is indeed updating because the state of our application is also updating. And now we have this persistence. So this is really good. And that's pretty much the fundamentals that you need to understand. Once you understand this fundamental, everything else is going to be extremely easy. Now, there is one thing that is a little bit annoying, and I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit just so you guys can really see it. Once I kind of hover or I grab something, you can see that the card is getting a little bit smaller. And once I drag it back, you can see it comes back. So this is definitely not a good user experience. Now, the reason why this is happening is once I'm dragging something, I'm taking that element out of the context of our app. And so, as you can see here, our app is adjusting accordingly. This card is adjusting accordingly. So what we can do to kind of fix that is we can use this provided within the droppable. So I'm going to go right under this div. And then right under this div, I'm going to say provided dot placeholder. So I'm going to say provided dot placeholder, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're getting some sort of error here. So right under this div, let's say provided, what's going on here? Not under this div, let's do it right here above the div. We're going to say provided dot placeholder. And what this is going to do is anytime that we remove a particular element is going to add a placeholder element in there just so we can have that element in our UI, and it's not going to kind of update the shape of everything that the shape of this card. Let me go ahead and show you what I mean. There we go. You can see here now we're not updating anything because that placeholder is being rendered. So how it does it, I'm not really sure. This is just some internal magic that's happening with react-dnd. It figures out the exact height that it needs to placehold, and it just does it. So you can see how kind of terrific this is. And now we have this wonderful reordering. So in the next video, let's go ahead and add the next portion of our application, which of course is going to be the actual items. And we're going to make it, of course, drag and droppable. We're going to finish off our application by adding multiple different droppables. So let's go back to our app, and what we want to do here is, instead of just rendering this H3, I'm going to create a brand new component that is going to be our store list of items. So I'm going to say function, and I'll say store list, like so. And this is going to take in the name, the items of that store, as well as the ID of that store. And for now, let's just return what we had before, which is a div that is going to have an H3. So div with an H3. Let me just go ahead and copy this. I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there. Now, of course, we're going to have to call this name, like so. And now what we can do is, instead of rendering this H3, let's just render this store list. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. And if I were to do that and refresh my application, everything is failing because, of course, we need to pass the props in. So I'm going to pass in, destructure out everything within the store. And now we have Walmart, Indigo, as well as Lowe's, and everything is still working. But now what we want to do is, of course, right over here, let me just go ahead and let's create another div. So I'm going to have the div here, and I'm going to go ahead and just cut this out for now. I'm going to give this a div of class name. I'm going to call this the store container. I'm going to have the H3 in there, and then below it, I'm going to have another div. So let's create another div, and this div is going to be the items container. So the items container. All right, and over here, we're going to iterate over our items. So we're going to say items.map. We're going to grab the item. As you can imagine, later on, we're going to need the index. So let's go ahead and grab that as well. And then for each item, we are going to render, just for now, let's render a div. So I'm going to say a div, and let's close this div off. And we're going to give it a class name of, let's say, item. So item container, not items, item, a singular. And then within this, we're going to have an H4 like so. And then we're just going to render the name of the item. So we're going to say item.name. Let's go ahead and save that. And we should get something like this, except this one is a little bit uglier than I was expecting. So let's go right above over here. As you can see, we have the store container. I'm going to remove this class from that. And there we go. So now we get the styles that we want. So now what I would like to do is I would like to reorder our items within our within this particular element. So as you can see here, within the store list, I want to be able to reorder them as well as add them to another store list if I want to. So before we had one droppable, which was the root, and we were just dragging these items back and forth. But now what we want to do is we want to have multiple droppables. So this store list, this is going to be a droppable. This is going to be a droppable. This too is also going to be a droppable. So each store list is going to be a droppable, and then each item over here is going to be a draggable. So what we can do to accomplish this is we can just change this div to be a droppable. Let's go ahead and just copy this and just paste that in there. Now, of course, this is going to need a droppable ID. And this time, because we have multiple, we're iterating over the stores and we're rendering multiple droppables, we can't just hard code it because in that case, it won't be unique. But what we can do is we can just give it the ID, which is unique because, of course, here you can see every store has a unique ID. All right, so I hope that makes sense. So there we go. So now we have our droppable. And then over here, you can see we have our name. Now what we're going to need to do, of course, is we need to kind of wrap this in that provider function or provided function. So I'm going to say here provided, and that is going to render this div. Oops. Yeah, let's go ahead. This provided is going to render this div. I'm going to just go ahead and save that. Now the reason why it's yelling at us is because we need to have one parent. So I'm going to have a div here that is going to have this parent. And we have to give it all of the different props that it needs. So it needs, we're going to say provided dot droppable props. And we also need to specify the ref. So we're going to say provided dot inner ref. Let's go ahead and save that. And so now we're done with the droppable, which is good. And we don't have to give it a type because we already specified the other one. And what we can do is we can just say, if it's not this type, we can do some other logic. So we can have an else clause. All right, and now what we need to do is we need to specify the draggable. So the draggable, I'm going to go ahead over here and I'm going to say draggable. And I'm going to grab this, cut it, paste it in here. I'm going to cut this portion out and I'm going to say provided, and then we're going to render this like so. Now, of course, the draggable also needs some information like the draggable ID. Now, what we can do for this, again, it has to be unique, is we can just say that this is going to be the item ID. Now, it also needs the index, which, well, we have the index over here. And also because we're doing iteration, we need to add the key just for React. We're going to say the item.id. Now, over here, we're going to have to pass it some props. So we're going to say provided, and then we're going to say dot drag handle props. Need a little bit more props. So we're going to say provided dot, this time draggable props. And then ref is going to be equal to provided dot inner ref. Give that a quick little save. There we go. Everything is fine and dandy. All right, so that should pretty much do it. Now, our app should be draggable. And if you were to hover over it, you can see we get this drag effect. So you can see here, we get this drag. We can drag this wherever it is that we want. Now, of course, this is kind of annoying that we're changing the size of our app. So, of course, we know how to fix this now. We're going to grab this provided. We're going to see where this div lives. And we're just going to say right about here, we're going to say provided dot placeholder, just like that. I never really know exactly where to put it. Maybe it's right here. There we go. Yeah. And now we're not going to have that annoyance effect. Provided. Let's see here. Let's do a quick little refresh. Provided is not defined. Where is it not defined? On line 129, it is not defined. Yes, because it has to be, of course, inside of the function. So let's place it right about here. I think that's where we should place it. There we go. So now we can, again, hover without that really terrible effect. Okay, and of course we can move this anywhere we want. We can move it here, we can move it here, we can move it here. We're moving it to different droppables. Now, of course, once we move it, it's going to go back to its original state because we haven't handled this change over here. So that's exactly what we're going to need to do. So now let's go over here and we're going to skip this type of group because we're not changing anything within this droppable, which has a type of group. We're changing it within these droppables that don't have a type. So what we can do here is we can kind of add all of our logic right below it. Now, before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to console.log. Let's console.log the destination, or let's console.log, yeah, the destination as well as the source, just to see how that looks right now. So the destination as well as the source. And let's inspect this for now. And so the logic is going to be a tad more complicated, but it's going to be pretty simple. So let's go over here, and I'm going to move it to lows. And you can see here that the source has this droppable ID, which is corresponding to Walmart. And you can see the destination has changed to this droppable ID. And of course, the index is different as well. So right now, this source is at lows, which should have, I believe, I forget which one it was. But if I were to move it maybe over here, it should have the ID of indigo as the destination, as well as the index of 2. So if we were to go here, you can see this is the ID of indigo, and this is the ID of 2. And this is really all the information that we're going to need in order to restructure and reformat our data. All right, so let's go ahead and accomplish that. So I'm going to go right over here, and let's, create all of the data that we need. So the first thing that we're going to need is we need to figure out exactly what the source item, the new source item array is. Because of course we want to kind of reorder this. And let me actually kind of just demonstrate it. So over here we have, let's say, name, we have Walmart. And then here we have items, we have an array of this. This is going to be an array. And we have, let's say, butter and milk. And I'm going to add just one more example just for the sake of time. We're going to say here Lowe's. We're going to say workbench as well as a hammer. So let's say what I want to do is I eventually want to move this hammer right here to Walmart. So eventually what I want to do to change the state is I want to move this hammer altogether from here to here. So I want to remove it from this items, and I want to add it to this items. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the items, the new source items. So I'm going to say const. I'll say new source items, because of course this is going to be updated, which is going to be this one. Now I'm going to say originally that is going to be equal to, and I'm going to say that the new source items is going to be equal to the stores, and I need to grab where that item is located within which store. So we'll have to figure that out. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say const, and I'll say store source index, because that's where the original item lived. I'm going to say that is going to be equal to stores dot find index, and I'm going to iterate over this. I'm going to say store, and I'll say store dot id is equal to the source dot droppable id. So source dot droppable id. So that's going to give us the source index. And then of course we're going to need to grab the destination index. So I'm going to say destination index, and that's going to be equal to stores dot, and I'll say find index, and I'll say store. And then over here, I'm going to say store.id is equal to, and this time I'll say destination.droppable ID. All right, so that's going to give us the index of the store that the item is living in. And then over here, what I can do now is I can just say store source index dot items. So that's going to give us the new source items. And of course, we can do the exact same thing with the destination. Now, here's the thing, though, with the destination. The destination can have the exact same droppable ID. So in that case, the items are actually going to be exactly the same. So we need to check for that. So I'm going to say here, I'm going to say const new destination items, and that is going to be equal to, and that's going to be equal to if the source dot droppable ID is not equal to the destination.droppable ID, so destination.droppable ID, then what we want to do is we want to do something very similar to what we've done here, except this time we want to use the destination index. Else, let's just use this new source items because it's going to be exactly the same. It's just, I guess, we're going to be changing the order of things. So let's go ahead and save that, and now it's nice and formatted. And now what we can do is we can utilize these values to remove the item that we want. So for the new source and for the new source items, we can just say const, and I'll say deleted item is equal to new source items, and I'll say dot splice. I'm going to say that this is going to be the item source index, or did I not specify that here? I believe I did. Item source index, or I guess I didn't. Well, what we can do to fix that is just say source dot index, and then over here I can say I want to completely remove it, and then I want to add it into the new destination items. So I can say here dot splice. So this is the exact same logic that we've done before, but now with the items array. So I can say destination dot index. You can say 0, and we can say deleted item. Now what we want to do is we want to add that back into the actual items themselves, or the actual stores themselves. So to do that, we can say here const new stores, and I can say give me that stores array, and over here I can just say, okay, new stores at the store source index. What I want you to do is I want that to be equal to an object where every value is exactly the same. So I'm going to say stores at the store source index, except for the items. So the items are going to be different. The items are going to be the new source items. And of course, we are going to do the exact same thing for the destination. So over here, we're going to say new store. This time we're going to say store destination index, and we'll say here store destination index, and this time this is going to be new destination index. And if this doesn't really make all too much sense to you, just do a bunch of console.logs. It's pretty intuitive. What we're doing is we're just kind of removing a specific item from one array, and then we're adding it into another, and then we're just kind of reformatting or overriding what was existing in these stores themselves. And then lastly, all we would have to do is just say set stores, and over here we can just say new stores like so. And that should do it. That should update our state. So if I were to refresh the app now, we can update like this, of course. We've done that before. But now what we can do is we can update like this. So I can move this here, I can move it here, and it actually updates and persists. So there we go. That is how we can do that. And once you really truly understand how to do this kind of application, you can do whatever it is that we want. We can do this, for example, or actually let's look at something a little bit more complicated. Maybe something like this. This seems pretty complicated, but this is something that we can most definitely do. You can have 3 different droppables, and then over here, all these are different draggables, and all we would have to do is just figure out, which droppable that this item is going into, and at what index do we need to put it in. So it's really, really, really simple stuff, but it is extremely powerful. So I hope that makes a lot of sense, and hopefully you learned quite a bit from this tutorial, and I will see you guys in the next one.